These two missions were very important to the Spanish crown. If they had been successful, the entire Southeast would have changed, the New World would have changed, and possibly the impact on the international scene would have changed. The world would be different.
When people are asked today about the first beginnings of the current United States, most think of English Jamestown in Virginia, or Plymouth and the Mayflower in New England during the 1600s. Or even Spanish St. Augustine in the 1500s. Those are misconceptions learned in the grade schools of our youth. In reality, the origin of the current United States began over 1,000 miles south of Jamestown and Plymouth. 50 to 80 years before those settlements, and 6 to 26 years before St. Augustine, two major Spanish expeditions were launched into the current southeastern United States. In May 1539, a 600-man army led by Hernando de Soto plunged into the southeast at a bay in central Florida, beginning a 4-year odyssey, searching for riches of gold, silver, and precious stones. In August 1559, a 1,500-person expedition led by Tristan de Luna landed on Pensacola Bay, ordered by the Spanish king to establish the first long-term European colony in this country. The researchers of contact archaeology think that both these Spanish expeditions passed through portions of southwest Alabama and northwest Florida. Contact archaeology has investigated over 60 sites in these areas. Recorders of those Spanish expeditions left priceless written records of their adventures and the lives of the native peoples they met. The Spanish armies did not find peaceful children of the forests in this new country. The native peoples were fierce warriors. Unarmed Spaniards carrying white flags would have invited their own slaughter. 4 of the most important archaeological sites of the earliest European contact period exist in southwest Alabama and northwest Florida. Remarkably, 3 of these 4 sites have not been found. First, the largest battle ever fought between Europeans and natives in the current United States erupted in southwest Alabama at a native town named Mobile in 1540. Second, the first long-lived European colony in this country was established on Pensacola Bay in 1559. Third, the first long-lived European settlement in the interior of the current United States was established in southwest Alabama in 1559. And fourth, the first European campsite on Mobile Bay, Alabama was secured in the summer of 1560. Researchers have tried for over a century to locate these earliest archaeological sites to no avail. Contact archaeology has recently found one of them on Mobile Bay by revisiting University of Alabama excavation records from the 1970s. Cooperation between contact archaeology researchers resulted in the discovery of a Spanish campsite on Mobile Bay, visited by Luna. It's a major step. The contact archaeology research effort concerning this site and others is a collaboration of archaeologists, historians, translators, foundations, individual sponsors, landowners, and volunteers. The Hernando de Soto army of 1539 was comprised of 9 ships, approximately 600 people, 243 horses, and a herd of hundreds of pigs. Only about half the army and 25 horses survived the expedition. The pigs survived and multiplied. Their descendants still root up farmers' fields and game plots to this day. The vast majority of the Soto army were men from Spain. Less than a dozen came from France, Italy, Greece, Cuba, and even Africa. At least 2 women were on the expedition. One of the women was burned to death during a battle with the natives. Her name was Francesca. Another woman managed to survive the entire expedition from Florida all the way to Mexico. She was a serving woman to the Spanish upper class. She returned to Cuba from Mexico after the expedition. The Soto expedition was extremely well funded. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in today's market launched the endeavor. The professions of the members included mounted knights, foot soldiers, sailors, shoemakers, sword cutlers, tailors, carpenters, notaries, trumpeters, ship caulkers, priests, and believe it or not, more. On the morning of October the 18th, 1540, the 600-man Spanish army led by Hernando de Soto entered the small, heavily fortified native town of Mobila in southwest Alabama. A large and powerful army of native warriors, thousands strong, had set a trap for the Spaniards at the town. A pitched battle exploded and lasted most of the day. At the end of the day, the Spanish held the field, but every man in the army was wounded. Thousands died that day. Knights of Spain, along with their mounts, native warriors, and native women who helped lure the Spaniards into the town. Many of the women fell while wielding the weapons of their dead kinsmen. The remnants of the Spanish army spent the night amidst smoldering ruins of the town that had once been Mobila. The army licked their wounds for a month afterwards. They never reached their supply ships waiting for them in Pensacola Bay to the south. Soto turned them north for fear of losing his army and his fortune. Half of them died before they reached the safety of Mexico City some 2 years later. The survivors were almost unrecognizable beneath their animal skin clothes, their scruffy beards, and bedraggled appearance. Once the men were recognized, they became national celebrities, eventually moving on with their lives. The site of the huge battle at that small native town of Mobila in southwest Alabama is still a mystery, even to this day. 2 decades after the Mobila battle, the Spanish king ordered another expedition to return to the southeast. The Tristan de Luna expedition of 1559 consisted of 11 ships, some 1,500 people, and over 240 horses. Some 100 of the dying horses were thrown overboard during the stormy sail from Mexico to Florida, not without remorse. Both Spanish fleets of Soto and Luna anchored in Pensacola Bay, 20 years apart. One in 1539, the other in 1559. Spanish artifacts from the 1500s have been found at 6 different land sites along the Pensacola Bay shore. 2 shipwrecks from the Luna expedition have been discovered in the bay, grounded and sunk in a storm on a shallow sand shelf. The anchorage of the Luna fleet has not been found. Recently, a claim of the discovery of the Luna colony site on Pensacola Bay has been made by the University of West Florida. The claim may be a little premature. The definitive requirements for the colony have not been met as yet, such as fire hearths, Spanish burials, refuse pits, post holes defining Spanish structures like the church or royal warehouse or living quarters. The UWF claim may eventually prove to be true. However, the current claim seems to be a bit hasty. Contact archaeology examining other areas of Pensacola Bay for the Luna colony. The story will unfold in the coming months. With our historical and archaeological knowledge of the Soto and Luna expeditions, where does that take us? Well, it takes us to the archives, the field, and the lab. The historical consultant on the project is David Dodson. He has spent some 14 years of research having to do with historic archives in Europe, South America, and the U.S. He's an eminent scholar concerning the Luna expedition.
Well, the archaeologists dig holes in the ground. The role of the historian is to go dig into the archives, trying to find the documents, trying to find the clue of where to go dig. And that gets very involved. Luckily for us, when it comes to the Spanish kept very, very good records. Some of the documents look like they were just written yesterday. It's really amazing. The problem with them, with the Spanish documents, is the Spanish kind of like wrote in generalities. They weren't always very specific. The French, on the other hand, describe things a little bit more. The Spanish would say, we built a fort. The French might say, we built a fort with 4 bastions, and we had a flagpole, and we had a garden, and we had this. But with the Spanish documents, it's not quite as easy. So the research, you have to read something and then go find another document and kind of weave them all together to get an idea of what they're actually saying. And then one of the problems that we have today, a lot of the research that we've been utilizing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, if not since the 20s, were from translations actually done sometimes in the 1850s. And so part of my job as the historian and translator is to, one, find documents, try to translate them, pick out what we need for the archaeologist, and then also go back and review previous translations and see if today's knowledge, which we have a lot larger knowledge basis, that we can retranslate it and try to filter out even more little minuscule information. Because sometimes it's the minuscule that will allow us to find the big. And so in looking through documents, you start with one sentence, then you have to spiral out to the next sentences, the paragraphs, and then you might have to put it with other documents, and then you spiral back down, and then you can do the translation. It's tedious, but it can be very fun, very interesting, very enlightening, because one word, if you translate it a different way, means something totally different. An idea, a word that might mean nearby or close by or far from, all this, it's just how you translate the word. The archives that we go to the archives in Seville, Spain, Madrid, Spain. I've also been to about 12 archives in France. And in France, we're getting a lot of maps. Napoleon raided part of the archives of the Spaniards and took a lot back to the French archives. And so they're spread out. They're not just all in Paris. There's some in Brest. There's some in Aix-en-Provence. They've spread them all around. So I've been through about 12 archives in France, been to about 4 or 5 major archives in the United States, including the Library of Congress, the Newberry in Chicago, John Carter Brown up in Rhode Island, been down to the Caribbean, down to Santo Domingo. We've had people go through for us through the Mexican archives. So it's a very involved, it's slow, and sometimes you'll wait 8, 9 months for documents. You have to find the document you want, then you get permission to copy it, then you got to pay for the copy it, and then they'll copy it and then send it to you. So you can't be in a rush. You have to be very patient. But in between waiting for one document, you're looking for another document. So you're always digging through the archives constantly and not just being static. You just can't sit on your hands and wait. You've got to just, as the archaeologists keep putting holes in the ground, you keep digging through the archives. And I've been doing it now for about 14 years. And so we've made a lot of headway. We've, in some translations that were done in the past, looking at them again, we've actually found Indian mounds that have been misinterpreted or described differently. It gives us a better idea of what to go look for in the woods. If the first translation did not mention mounds, the archaeologists might go into an area and not look for mounds. But if we can find that there were mounds via a different translation, that gives them a heads up. And so it's a combination of working back and forth.
So I'm going to deal with the archaeology and the artifacts specifically. So many times people ask me, how do you know what a Spanish artifact looks like? How do you know what a Spanish site will look like if you do find one? That's great questions. We have those same questions going on all the time with us. And the key, of course, is generations of archaeologists having worked, literally generations of archaeologists, working to identify these beads, these metals, these potteries. And now we have something to go on. We're still learning, as I said, but one of the most diagnostic artifacts that we have and we look for are small glass beads. These are small items, smaller oftentimes than your little fingernail. But they all have different names. Nueva Cadiz, faceted chevrons, turquoise blue, etc. Some of them are tighter on the timeline than others. Some of them start, say, in the late 1400s and go all the way through the 1700s. Well, those aren't very helpful unless we have them with other types. So, glass beads, very important. What else? Coins. Coins, very important. Treasures. Well, we don't find them in treasure chests, no. We find them individually. Sometimes in what we call general midden context. In other words, mixed with other artifacts, oftentimes native artifacts. Sometimes we find them with native burials, sometimes in refuse pits, etc. But they're very distinctive. This coin, particular coin, basically says that Spain rules not only that part of Europe, but also the New World as well. New World meaning in this case, Mexico and South America. And this is what the coin says. All right, what else? Pottery. Pottery is very important diagnostically. We've also given them names. I say we, I'm talking about myself and other people and specialists and generations in the past. Names like Y'all Blue on White, Isabella Polychrome, names like that. So archaeologists can communicate with one another, saying, oh, how many of these types did you find, et cetera, et cetera. Very important, the pottery. We get a variety of metals in these Spanish contexts. Up and down the Alabama River, we've been very fortunate. We've gotten a number of not only metal artifacts, but other diagnostic 16th century Spanish artifacts. And that's where we're looking now. It's a long process. We have to get permission from landowners to get on their property, obviously. And then we have to do what we call research design development. In other words, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? So some of the metals we're finding in that lower Alabama River, one of them dates to the 1500s, and it's a horseshoe, very distinctive. It looks different from contemporary horseshoes or even 18th century horseshoes. Very distinctive. We're also getting, in this case, a copper candle, a brass candlestick in a brass container. Very distinctive 16th century. Sometimes we'll find, in this case, Mobile Bay, buttons that are distinctive again to the 16th century. And in one case, and again in Mobile Bay, we've come up in the last few years with a discovery. It's a major discovery. It's still in a hypothesis stage, but it's rapidly over and over again. People are contacting me saying, I think you got it. Got it, meaning the Luna campsite when they came back down the river to Mobile Bay before they went back to Pensacola Bay. So in this case, we have boat cleats. And you say, well, boat cleats, that could be from any time period. Yes, but in this particular case, it's distinctive, and it's found also with a spur from the time period, very similar, some of these artifacts, to those found over on the Atlantic coast at a similar time period Spanish colony. It's called Santa Elena. So, what else? Arquebus gun barrel. Arquebus being a matchlock weapon, not a flintlock weapon. Only one has been found on the lower Alabama River. They're extremely rare, extremely rare. So you say, well, Well, where do you find these artifacts? As I said, sometimes we find them even in refuse pits, garbage pits. We found them, in fire hearths, where the Spanish sat around a fire hearth and at night and dropped things accidentally. We haven't found those necessarily on the lower Alabama River or on Pensacola Bay, but in the southwest there was a very important site found, a Coronada site of the same time period as the Luna expedition. The Soto expedition. So, where do we go from here? We feel like we know what these primary sites are going to look like archaeologically. And these primary sites in the lower Alabama River, one of them is the battle site of 1540, where De Soto's army clashed with the Native Americans. The natives had thousands of warriors there, and the Spanish had about 600 people. The battle lasted all day long, and the Spanish held the field, but all their people were wounded. So it was one of the largest battles and earliest battles ever fought between Europeans and Native Americans in the United States, the current United States. So we're looking for that battle site, and it will be distinctive. We haven't found it, neither has anybody else to this point. The other special site we're looking for on the lower Alabama River is the Luna settlement. They were there approximately 10 months. It's the first interior settlement of Europeans in present-day United States. And that site would be distinctive. They stayed there, as I said, for a while, and they had to have buried some of their people. They had to have had fire hearths and possibly other features that we're not aware of as yet. So we're looking hard for that. And fortunately, the landowners up there are cooperating with us. Otherwise, we couldn't even access the sites. So we're also working on Pensacola Bay, looking for the same type sites. One site, that is the Luna colony of 1559, the earliest and first long-lived colony in what is now the current United States. So, as I said before, we've made progress. We're still looking, and we will report our findings. The first long-term European settlers in this country were not on the Atlantic coast. They were on the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, and in the interior of northwest Florida and southwest Alabama. We're looking for them. We'll keep you posted.